WCKS, The Whale. We get you over the hump and back into music.
Hello,
Welcome to the show.
this is Caleb.
And Bill with Philosophy Talks. We apologize for our listeners who were hoping to listen live today. However, the instant streaming on the website is still down after we were hacked by an Albanian hacker group.
Well, shit happens.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we can do that.
We can swear now.
Oh, yeah,
Because we're not live.
Yeah, so we don't have little kiddies listening today.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's more kids on YouTube.
I guess it's a good point, yeah.
Have you read those comments on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
They suck, man.
Yeah. Anyway, we got a real treat for you guys today. We are talking about moral responsibilities to future generations. Woohoo!
Yay!
And primarily around environmental concerns.
All right, so let's simplify that, because I mean that sounds like a bunch of jargon, because it is. So the idea that this is what we're actually going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the suggestion that people who don't yet exist in the future, we have to consider them ethically. So we have to, in today's topic, do we care for the planet or not? Because that would affect people who don't yet exist.
But when we're talking about caring for the planet, we're limiting ourselves to a purely anthropocentric view, meaning that we're caring for the planet for our own sake, or in this case, for
Human's sake.
Future humans' sake.
Yes.
Do people born 100 years from now, should we care about what kind of environment they're going to live in the future? I mean, if we completely screw up this earth, and if they're living in a world where you can't even breathe the air, should we care? Is that our problem? I mean, it's not our problem, but I mean, should we care? Should we take that into consideration? Are we doing anything wrong by leaving them in unlivable environment?
So let's parse this out and see what we got. So let's start this out by just taking a look at this. We're going to talk about the suggestion that we should care about future generations in terms of rights, mostly.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, in a nutshell, when we're talking about rights, without explaining where they come from, because we've done that in the past, we're going to talk about what do you have to not do to people, or in some cases, what are you supposed to do to or for people? So there's two. There's negative and positive rights.
So when we're saying that somebody or something has rights, we are saying that they are a moral patient. By moral patient, I mean that there are certain things that you have to do to them or certain things that you cannot do to them. So for example, if you have the right to life, then that means somebody else does not have the right to take that life away from you. That is, somebody can't kill you.
Exactly.
So that's an example of a negative responsibility, something that you can't do to somebody else. A positive responsibility is a duty that you have to treat another person a certain way.
Sure. Like having to pay taxes for healthcare, or having to be polite and courteous.
Yeah. That's
tipping.
That's considered a duty that you have to other people. People deserve to be treated well. So far, we have just been talking about people who are alive today. Caleb clearly has rights because he's sitting across the room from me. He's alive right now, and he has those rights, and I cannot violate them. But it's a different case if we're thinking about future generations, because if we're thinking 2, 3, 4 generations from now, these are people that haven't been born yet. Essentially, we're arguing whether or not if people have rights who don't yet exist.
Do they have personhood is another way to phrase that. So, not the last show, 2 shows before, we talked about something called personhood. And it's the suggestion that there's a number of factors that go into considering whether or not someone is eligible for consideration. And on top of that, whether you have a duty to be ethical to them, and what all that stipulates.
And we won't get too deep into it, but in a nutshell, some of these qualities to qualify you for personhood would be self-awareness, consciousness, or the biggest one, the capacity to reciprocate morality.
Sure.
That is being able to...
I
was about to say that is to reciprocate morality.
The definition of definition is definition. Anyways, so this whole the reciprocity thing, we used an example a couple of weeks ago, and we said, so imagine you're walking in the Sahara, you see a lion. Do you have a moral responsibility to not kill that lion? Well, I mean, no. I mean, if you decide you're going to be moral to it, and you make it eligible for a single-payer tax system, it's going to eat you. So you can't really be moral to a lion because it doesn't give a shit.
Well, Or rather, you could just say that the lion is incapable of considering your rights. Meaning that the lion is not thinking to himself, I want to eat that guy. Caleb looks pretty delicious. I mean, come on.
Lion doesn't give a
Come
shit.
on. But he's not going to be thinking about that. He has no qualms against just eating you.
Yeah, well, why would he?
So, I mean, you shouldn't have any qualms against killing it first for your own sake. You know, you have a right to protect yourself. Now, if this was a different person, of course, that'd be a different story.
Exactly.
So the question is, do we have responsibilities to future generations? Well, primarily in the last 1 or 2 centuries, population of humans has absolutely exploded. It was just in the early 1900s, we were at 2 or 3 billion people?
Something like that.
I think we hit 2 billion at around 1850.
Now we're at 7.
We're past 7.
Mm-hmm.
And we're due to hit 8 billion in 2020, 2025.
Something like that.
Something in that ballpark.
Anyways.
And there's a clear correlation between growth in humanity and increasing environmental concerns. The more people there are on Earth, the more resources we're consuming, the more pollution we're creating, the more harm we're doing.
Oh, not to mention starvation. I mean, even beyond that. So let's say the population gets so large that we kill off the environment to such an extent that it's not possible to grow enough food to feed the number of people living on the planet.
Right. I mean, up to this point, the reason our population has been growing at such a rate is because it's essentially unchecked. Because we have such an overabundance of food, there's nothing to restrict population growth, really. Or at least there's not enough factors in there to restrict population growth.
Except not wanting to, have kids.
So clearly there's a correlation. The more people we have, the more damage we're doing to the environment, unless we completely change our habits, but it doesn't look like that's going to be happening anytime soon. But so, little known fact, there is actually a legitimate organization, well, I use that term loosely, called the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, which, as you can imagine, this organization actually advocates for the voluntary extinction of the human race, because we are basically a tumor on the earth, so we should voluntarily let ourselves go extinct. Not necessarily all simultaneously commit suicide. You know, we don't need to all be drinking the purple Kool-Aid, but they're advocating that we just all go voluntarily celibate and just
sterile.
Celibate, sterile, same, in either case, stop procreating, leave the planet be, because we're not doing any good for it, essentially. So, I mean, that brings up the question, I mean, would we be doing anything wrong by stop procreating? Do we have any kind of natural duty to procreate?
Well, no. I mean, so...
Because that would just be stupid.
Well, here's the suggestion behind that. So, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this argument. Well, it's natural, so clearly it's the right thing to do. I mean,
because
other people...
Evolution demands it.
Yeah. So, lions kill zebras, so it's okay for me to totally decimate my business opponent because that's just the way life is. Okay, well, wrong.
Survival of the fittest, bruh.
Yeah, bullshit.
That's what we like to call a naturalistic fallacy. Essentially saying that just because it is natural, it must therefore be the right way or the correct way or good way to do things. And clearly that is not always necessarily the case. Just because something is natural does not correlate to it being good or right by any means.
Precisely. Just like things that are morally correct don't necessarily correlate with what's legally correct. So it may be legal for me to do something, but it still may be wrong.
Technically, counting cards in casinos is legal to do, but it is heavily frowned upon by casinos for obvious reasons. Because, I mean, it's cheating, but not cheating at the same time. You're basically cheating in your head. I mean, it's supposed to be a game of complete chance, but there's a way to twist it so that it's not up to chance. And legally, you're allowed to do that. But if you're caught doing it, you're going to get kicked out of the casino and maybe roughed up a little bit. So that could be an example of something that is legal, but not necessarily moral. Now, on the flip side, an example of something that is illegal, but not really immoral is a case I like to go to, gay marriage, which just recently DOMA got turned down. Woo!
So, I mean, ideally, legality and ethicality would match up perfectly.
But then if we look at the deontology example, deontology is essentially rights-based ethics. One could make the argument that future generations have the right to life. Therefore, we would be doing something immoral by denying them that right, by stopping to procreate, by having this voluntary extinction of the human race. Future people, they have the right to be born. But again, that brings up the question of, do people who don't yet exist have rights? Can they have rights? Can we really take them into consideration?
Okay. Okay. So yeah, there's a couple things about this deontological argument. Firstly, I can see a couple holes. One, we have the same problem that we're going to be looking at for the rest of the show. Do people who don't exist have rights?
Don't exist yet.
Sure, but they don't exist right now.
Right.
Yeah, they don't exist.
And yeah, we're operating upon the assumption that eventually they will be born, therefore eventually they will exist.
Okay. They currently don't exist.
Right.
Yes. Let's make that clear. They do not exist.
Okay.
On top of that, they also is making the assumption that people who don't exist would want to live. Or rather, yeah, no, I think that's good. Because let's take a look at this. If you, Bill, had the choice to not exist, so for some reason, it's like in like one of those really weird cartoons that cropped up during the 70s. So, you pop into existence and you're like in heaven next to a great big slide down to earth, and there's God, and he's going next, 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 and you're like, hold on a tick. Let's talk about this. All right, what's going on down there? I want to know what I'm getting into before I do the whole shoot out the vagina thing. So
whoa, before I sign my life away and all.
Yeah. Let's talk about this. All right. So we've got your genocide and your rape, your racism, your economic inequality. And the whole place stinks. I'm good.
You got your mass starvation. Did you mention genocide?
I did mention genocide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we mentioned it twice actually. Yeah, so
I'm gonna go ahead and pass on that.
Just pop me back into non-existence, because death is nothing to me, and if it's nothing to me, and life is pretty crappy, well, zero is a lot better than like negative infinity.
But that kind of brings up an interesting little thought experiment. Can you comprehend your own non-existence?
No.
That's not even a fair choice. Like, if I give you the choice, Caleb, would you like to exist or not exist? You can't make a reasonable decision there. Because,
sure I can.
You can comprehend your own existence, sure, because you already exist. But can you comprehend non-existence? Of course not. Because you've never not existed.
Yeah, but I can imagine what it will be like.
No, you can't.
In that.
No, you can't.
It won't be anything, so it doesn't even matter.
You can't imagine nothing. You can't imagine non-existence.
All right, I can know that this is like in an abstract, abstract form. This is what it'll be like.
You can imagine a blank slate, but you are still imagining a slate that is blank. You can't imagine the slate not even being there.
Okay, that's all right. So existence is a predicate. I get where you're going.
Okay.
But let's talk about it this way.
Existence precedes essence.
So think about it like this. I'm sure there's some of you who would say, What are you talking about? No, you're crazy, man. I've got life pretty good. I definitely want to live. Well, let's roll out some numbers for you. All right? Let's do it like this. All right. So you're up there chilling with God, looking at the chute down to earth. And you decide you think about it for a second. You're like, all right, well, there's about, 300 million people in the U.S.?
It's about 320. We'll just say 300.
All right. Well, a pretty solid chunk of them are below the poverty line. And their life's kind of bad. Not terribly bad, but it's kind of bad on a regular basis. You've got the fact that you are the absolute bottom of the social pyramid, which studies have shown that people in lower income brackets, besides just financial worries, they're constantly kicked all around on a sociological level. They have something called cortisol that's released into their body. And this has been shown in primates as well. And they don't have physical problems to worry about. They just worry about where they are in the social hierarchy. And the lower you are in the social hierarchy, the more cortisol is released on a regular basis. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So when you're freaked out, you get stressed, cortisol is released, and then you have a number of different effects, like increased alertness, which can cause jitteriness if it's too long. But it's meant to save you in the wild. What it winds up doing in society, 21st century society, is it kills you significantly faster. And it's a very painful experience to be living constantly under physiological stress. It's horrible. So those people, they've got your stress going for you. And then you have another, that's just the bottom percentage of the population. It also extends up a few levels.
You could yeah, you can make the argument that for those people, that life itself is literally not worth living.
I am making that argument.
Right. I mean, yeah, and there are some people that their life has a far greater amount of suffering in it than it does pleasure. That it's not worth the added benefits of existing because there's so much suffering. I mean, that's kind of taking the utilitarian view.
Sure.
That's a moral act is that which brings about the greatest amount of good, as long as the pleasure overrides the amount of pain that it's caused. If it maximizes pleasure, minimizes pain. But in some people's cases, they have a far greater amount of pain in their life, a far greater amount of suffering than they do enjoyment.
Absolutely.
So for those people, you could possibly make the argument that if they were to not exist, they would essentially be at 0 on the scale of pleasure pain, as opposed to being far on the suffering end of the spectrum.
Some of them may be in the negatives.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you'd be at 0 as opposed to being, negative
Okay. Yeah.
infinity.
Well, let's say that, let's be really generous. This is being really generous. Let's say that's only 25% of the American population that lives like that.
Mhm.
That, if they hadn't ever existed,
They would be better off.
yes. I mean, I know a lot of those people, if you'd ask them, you guys say, would you prefer to not exist? They would say, what? No. Well, okay, they're already existing. You can't comprehend your own non-existence. It's a little difficult. So that's just America. You've got all your other countries, some of which are first world countries. So you've got stuff like Sweden, Britain, France, some of the European Union. Well, that's nice. But they make up a very small percentage of the population, the global population. Let's look at some of the big contenders. You've got your India, where, I mean, rape is kind of popular there at the moment. Sorry, India. And then you've got China. That's not doing a lot better. Don't forget your poverty. And then let's talk about Africa. Africa. You guys know about Africa, right? Yeah, they're they're not a country. They are a entire continent where the vast majority of people walking about have a significantly lower quality of life than you do, and they've also had a decent number of genocides, and I mean, they've got some good diseases. They don't have
They've had their fair bit of civil wars and tragedies and, lynchings going on among their own people. Every time they discover a valuable resource, boom, civil war.
Yeah.
Every time.
And then first world countries takes it.
Yeah, give Africa a break.
So anyways, yeah, you're looking at the global population, because it's a crapshoot. It's a percentage game. So you are significantly more likely to be born into something that is horrible and much worse than life. Like, everyone says, oh yeah, no, you're the universe experiencing itself. Well, that's really neat. But you are the universe experiencing the asshole of the universe. So I want you to consider that for a little bit.
Very elegant, Caleb.
I want you to consider that for a little bit before you just say, yeah, well, I mean, definitely want to exist. You don't, trust me. So
You are the shit stain on the underwear of the universe.
that's a pretty thought. Can we get that put on shirts?
You are the shit stain on the whitey tighties of the universe.
So, yeah, it's looking pretty bad for the whole future generations have a right to life that they'd want to live. Don't forget the problem that do they even have rights? We'll get to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, consider the fact that, and for a lot of people on Earth, things are pretty bad. I mean, you and I, we're pretty privileged. We got our first world problems, like my Wi-Fi's not even working. Better off not even existing. Yeah, we have our personal problems, but for a majority of the world, things suck. And you could argue that for a majority of the world, life is not worth living. And sadly, for a lot of these people, things seem to only be getting worse. I mean, there's more people being born than ever before, and the majority of the population growth is happening in countries where they're facing a lot of these issues. They have the highest birth rates, and they have the the least restrictive population legislation. They have the highest rates of poverty, highest rates of infant mortality. Life is tough for them.
Besides just like the raw fact that there's no fiscal net for these countries, and there's a lot of terrible things going on, you also have to consider the fact that, I mean, the purpose of our show is environmental concerns to future generations. Do they have the right for us to take care of the planet.
So we're saying that if we keep on the path that we're going on now, more people are going to be born in the future. Future generations are going to be living in a worse world than we are right now. You're going to have worse air pollution. You're going to have worse water pollution. And more importantly, climate change is a thing that's happening, and it can potentially devastate the human population. I mean, if it keeps going the way it is, life on Earth may not be able to sustain itself, or at least human life will not be able to sustain itself if problems like climate change continue. So if that's the road that we're on, then in 100 years, for a vast majority of humanity, we can say that life may not be worth living. And that is assuming that if we do not put into place drastic environmental legislation to correct all these problems, say if we continue the path that we're on now, that's what's going to happen. These people are going to be born into a miserable, miserable world. But there's this thing called the butterfly effect. You may have heard it before. You may have seen that movie with Ashton Kutcher. Pretty good movie. But anyway, what the butterfly effect...
No, it wasn't. Terrible movie.
I liked it.
Oh, man. You haven't seen Reservoir Dogs, huh? You don't know what good movies are, man.
Yeah, that's true. Apparently I don't. But anyway, but essentially butterfly effect in a nutshell is that small events can bring about drastic different outcomes in the future. If you change one event in today's timeline, it could bring about an entirely different future than what we're already going to have. So say if we don't pass a certain legislation, if we don't pass legislation to save the environment, then that is going to bring about a group of people. We'll call them sewer people. I mean, they're people in the same sense as us, but because life on there sucks so badly, they have to live in the sewers.
It's like Fallout.
Yeah, essentially, they're born into Fallout, and life sucks in Fallout. Unless you collect enough bottle caps and make it big.
Well, I never collected enough bottle caps. I always got hit by that jerk with a hammer right out of the starting gate.
No. But anyway, but these people will only exist if you do not pass that legislation. Because even small little changes in the timeline of events can bring about completely different people. I mean, consider this, that if even at the moment of a person's conception, if that moment of conception happened a split second later, a completely different person would have been born. The little sperm swimmies would have, just a little different sperm swimmy would have gotten to the egg. He would have won the race, and that would bring about a completely different human. I mean, in the case that we pass legislation, that is a drastic change, which bring about completely different global population in 100 years. So let's say if we do pass environmental legislation, and in 100 years, the world is A-okay. The atmosphere is doing all right. Ozone layer repaired. We can breathe the air. We can drink the water. Dysentery is no longer really a thing because, we can actually drink the water in foreign countries. And these people that exist in this world are going to be different than the sewer people that would be born from not passing legislation. So for these people, they're living A-okay life. We'll call them privileged liberal yuppies. We will call them
hipsters.
We will call them privileged liberal yuppies / hipsters. And these people, they're living a kick-ass life. They're living the dream. Resources are in abundance, and we're not screwing up the environment the way we are today. But at the moment of when we're trying to decide whether or not to pass this legislation, if we're thinking about, if we're trying to pass legislation, we're trying to think about future generations. We think to ourselves, well, we have a responsibility to these future generations. We have to make a life that is okay for them. So we're going to pass this legislation because they're worried about the welfare of the sewer people because they don't want them to live in the sewers, right? So they pass the legislation. But as a result of passing the legislation, those sewer people, they no longer exist. They were never born and they never existed. And this is what's called the argument of disappearing beneficiaries. Essentially saying that if we pass a legislation taking into consider future generations, by doing so, we are essentially splitting the timeline and benefiting a completely different group of people. So the sewer people who would have been born as a result of not passing legislation, they don't exist and they never existed. So we're not helping them in any sense. We're not doing any good for them because they just simply don't exist. But the hipster yuppies, they got it right on. We're helping them. Now, if we don't pass legislation, hipster yuppies, they don't get to live in a kick-ass world, but they're not harmed in any way either. They also just simply don't exist because they just weren't born as a result.
I think I see a pretty major problem with this.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of problems with this.
Yeah. The biggest one being the suggestion that you can differentiate future peoples.
Right. It's essentially saying that, we can, even if we acknowledge that different groups of people will come about depending on our actions, it's impossible to differentiate between these two groups.
Yeah, it's better to just say that there's one group of future people. It doesn't matter whether they're going to be the super people or what. They're going to be people.
And what that group of people is completely up to chance. It's impossible to predict it.
And if you assume these people have rights, like we're assuming, then you have an obligation to these people, whatever kind of people they may turn out to be.
Right. But from there, that can kind of bring us into what's called the argument from ignorance. And what that's saying that how can we possibly have moral responsibilities or considerations to future generations if we have no idea what their interests are going to be? They don't yet exist, so we don't know what their interests are going to be. So how can we take their interests into consideration? How should we care about them? What if they like living in the sewer? What if they like breathing polluted air for whatever reason? We have no way of knowing for sure. That's the argument from ignorance. We're ignorant of what these future people are going to be like.
And that's just a bad argument. I can't imagine anyone who'd want to live in a polluted environment.
Right. An easy counter argument to that is we can reasonably assume what the interests of future generations is going to be. We cannot think of any reasonable argument to support that they would not want to live in a livable environment. Therefore, we can reasonably assume that that would be in their interest, so we should take that into consideration. At the very least, we can assume that they deserve or will want a livable environment. Do you want to get into the temporal location?
I want to get into the piece de resistance. So we're going to do some metaphysical name drop and ontological bullshit right here. And it's something that we want to call the arguments from temporal location. And it rolls off the tongue like this. So,
I'm kind of thinking maybe we should cut out the swearing now.
Okay, well, fine. We're gonna do it for the television show. Any reputation we got is gonna quickly be flushed down the drain as the quality of our show exponentially deteriorates, as does the quality of the information we're spreading and our vocabularies.
Professionalism. Who needs that jazz?
Yeah.
All right, get into start from the beginning. Argument from temporal location.
All right. So taking a look at this, we're gonna get into some metaphysical stuff, and it's called the argument from temporal location. And here's how we're gonna parse it out. All right, so imagine this. There's a dude in, I don't know, like Czechoslovakia, something like that. And if you push a button in front of you, he's going to die or have incredible pain.
But I offer you $20 to do so.
Yeah, well, it's still wrong. It's morally wrong. I may do it because, $20.
Yeah.
I'm not going to see it. But yeah, so it's morally wrong, though. It's definitely wrong. The question is whether or not I'll do it.
We'll say, one could make the argument that, the guy's halfway across the world. You can't see him. He's not in front of you. He's not part of your society. You've never met this guy. You never will meet this guy. Why should you give a crap? Well, because he still exists.
Yeah.
And just because you can't see him, he is still there.
And he qualifies under all things for personhood. He may not. Well, I don't even know if you can say that he doesn't contribute to society, because we are a global society. Everything that anyone does in some way is part of this newly emerging global social contract.
Right.
So that said, yeah, you definitely have a responsibility to not push that button and kill the guy. And so, all right, what about a dude who lives 20 years in the future? Or he's not even born yet. 200 years in the future. 40,000 years in the future. It'll be so long in the future that you will have been long dead and everyone will have forgotten about you. Okay, well, you can say, no, why? He doesn't exist. Okay, well, think of it like this.
Well, a lot of people would say, no, it'd still be wrong to do that because you're still killing a guy. And then I say, again, what if I offer you $20? They would say, well, still no. Well, what if you push that button, that guy dies, but I give you the cure to AIDS? Okay, most people would probably say yes in that case.
Let's not overcomplicate this. Keep things simple.
Okay. But AIDS, man.
Tell to Africa. Anyways.
Poor Africa.
Please edit that out.
Okay. You might want to start from the beginning. We'll have to edit a lot of that out. It's Africa. Oh, that's terrible. Okay.
Anyways.
Whew.
All right, so you're doing Czechoslovakia. Now, let's say there's someone living 40,000 years in the future. Do you have an ethical consideration to this dude who will exist long after you're dead and after everyone's forgotten about you, but you somehow injure him in some way? You push a button, and it's like a really, really slow bullet that eventually kills him. So, most people would say, okay, well, I mean...
Well, most people say wrong if it doesn't serve some kind of purpose. I mean, if you're just needlessly killing somebody, even if it's 40,000 years in the future, that would be wrong. But if it is somehow bringing about some kind of good here and now, if it's bringing some kind of substantial benefit to justify that, then that would be, people can rationalize that.
Maybe.
Arguably, some people would rationalize that as such.
So, that said, there's a way to look at it, and it goes like this. So, okay, why was it wrong for you to kill the guy in Czechoslovakia? And not necessarily morally wrong for you to kill the guy in the future. Let's just assume that you think it's not wrong. Okay, well, the guy in Czechoslovakia, he is, 20,000 miles away from you?
Sure. Probably not that far, but
Probably not.
we'll just say 20,000.
I mean, worst case scenario, you make a lap.
I don't
around the world.
even think the world is that long.
Yeah, no big deal. You just make a lap. It's whatever. Anyways, so let's say, fine, it's 20,000 miles.
We're gonna cut this out.
So let's say it's 20,000 miles from you to Czechoslovakia.
We'll call him Checky.
We have this dude who's living 20,000 miles away, and you kill him. Okay, well, it's wrong because he still exists, and he has rights and stuff. And the only thing that separates you from him is the fact that there is 20,000 miles apart between
Right.
you.
And we can't disregard that just because somebody is far away from us, because the person still exists. I mean, space should be irrelevant in this sense.
Okay. Well, let's consider the fact that there are a number of well-respected scientists and philosophers and all that stuff who say that, well, time is the fourth dimension. So you've got your height and your length and your width, but then you also have this arrow that is coming temporally out of the paper, and
it's all wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey.
Yeah. So you've got time, which is a consideration, and it's, I mean, in terms of some of these theories, time is no different than location.
Meaning that in any and all cases, it would be wrong to bring about harm to somebody who lives in the future, even if they don't yet exist.
Precisely. So it's 40,000 years of the future is no different than 20,000 miles away. It's just a different direction.
Correct. I mean, yeah, you hear that along in like modern physicists. They say that time is not linear the way we perceive it. But a counter argument could be that we can't really consider somebody who lives in the future because clearly we perceive time as being linear. We can't perceive it as being wibbly wobbly. So we can't really be obligated to consider that. We can't really be obligated to consider that future person's.
It's not
rights.
within the scope of our knowledge.
Exactly.
Furthermore, I mean, we'll consider it.
You can't expect us to consider that.
Let's look at the way back argument, which is my counterexample to this. So, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, stand-up guy. I don't particularly like him.
Racist.
So I decide I do that beard and the top hat, very unfashionable. At the time, maybe, but he looked like a corpse. So you got Abraham Lincoln. I'm not a fan. I mean, really, I'm actually pretty indifferent. But let's say I'm not a fan. So I take a stroll over to Abraham Lincoln's grave, and I proceed to do exactly what you think I did on Abraham Lincoln's grave.
We'll leave that one up to the imagination, folks.
So, did I just wrong Abraham Lincoln? Was that morally wrong?
I mean, does he care?
Does he care? Have I slighted Abraham Lincoln? And if I have slighted Abraham Lincoln, am I morally wrong? I mean, for that, not for, I don't know, desecrating a national landmark and or causing some poor low-wage slave to have to go and clean that mess up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you'd definitely be doing harm in that sense, but you would hear a lot of people saying, like, that is a disgrace to his honor.
Yeah.
You know, assuming that someone who is dead still has some kind of rights that you are violating. And if we're going to use the temporal argument saying that, sure, just because somebody exists in the future doesn't mean that they won't exist. So if we're going to disregard the temporal arguments, then we also have to consider past generations. If we say future generations have rights, then wouldn't that mean that past generations also have rights? That people who died long ago, that they still have some kind of
rights?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Are they still a moral patient? Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Okay, so you have the right to not be killed if you're dead. You also have the right to your stuff, your possessions. Okay, well, I'm sorry, if you're dead and I don't know you, I'm not terribly worried about your stuff. I mean, grave robbing is like one of the least important of all crimes. It's not a huge deal because they're dead. Right?
Right. Well, I mean, keep in mind that say if you steal something off a course, if you do grave robbing or something like that, are you doing any harm to that person who has already died? No. Are you doing harm to that person's family? I mean, that could do severe psychological damage. If you dig up somebody's grave and steal a wedding ring off of a corpse, that can do a lot of damage to that person's family. They're going to be distraught over that because they still have very fond memories.
Well, if you just leave it out, yeah. I mean, you put it back.
I mean, who would leave out a perfectly good corpse? I mean, if it's just sitting there.
Let's just turn this around.
But I mean, if we're talking about Abe Lincoln too, if you desecrate his grave in any way, I mean, that's going to do damage to the country's morale. People are going to take personal offense to that, and you're going to be harming, American citizens in that way. So are you harming Abe Lincoln directly? No, but it's doing damage to other people. So you're still violating some other people's rights. They have the right to their emotional health, and if you bring harm to that, you are violating their right.
Sure. However, with the rest of these dead people, there's no real way to give them rights.
Yeah.
But I mean, this temporal argument suggests that you kind of have to, because you can't discriminate against people who existed in the past.
Right.
Because that's discrimination. That's wrong.
Exactly. Hear that, kids?
But I mean, if in the future, and you don't care, and you throw your cigarette butts on the ground, then you're ruining the rights of future people. But not if you throw them on the ground. But you're not ruining past people's rights. That doesn't make any sense. There's no reason why you should pick the future as opposed to the past.
Yeah, if you're going to disregard the temporal argument in that sense. So we're kind of stuck in a pickle here. We're trying to think, okay, do future generations, do they have rights? And it looks like not necessarily, not the way we like to define rights now. But do we owe them some kind of consideration? Most people would argue yes, but it's difficult to draw the line. Like, how much consideration do they deserve? I mean, obviously we have a duty to people who are alive today first, because they exist here and now. They are people that we know exist. They are people that can reciprocate that morality. They have rights. They are people. They have personhood. But we can't completely disregard the needs of people today for people who are going to be living in the next generation. We have to take them into consideration, at least minimally, that we have some kind of minimal moral consideration for them. So you can kind of look at this from a utilitarian aspect. So we can look at the founder of utilitarianism, actually, Jeremy Bentham. He was stuck with this as to, okay, if we are trying to decide what is the morally correct action to take in any given situation, we're thinking about what brings about the greatest amount of good. So that works for if we're just talking about people alive today. But he was stuck with, well, what about people who are going to be living 100 years from now? I mean, clearly they have some kind of, we have to consider them at least minimally. So he devised a sort of, it was an informal utilitarian calculus. Sort of, he weighted the considerations of future generations. So think of it like this. people who are alive today, we'll just say today's generation, has a moral weight of 40%. Okay? People who are going to be alive in the next generation after we die, people are going to be alive 50, 100 years from now, whatever, they have consideration, but maybe not as great as people who are alive today. I mean that we take their needs into account, but we don't consider them as greatly as we do people who are alive now. So we'll give them consideration of 30%. Going along that same train of thought, people who are alive in the next generation, 20%, and after that, 10%. And this is just a generalization just to try to illustrate this point. So we're saying that decisions we make today from a utilitarian aspect, today's generation deserves the greatest amount of consideration. I mean that if it brings about the greatest amount of good for people who are alive today, they deserve the most weight. But say if we do something that fulfills our needs today, but at the cost of bringing suffering to all future generations, well, that would be wrong. Even though that they're in the future, they deserve some more consideration. And then if it creates too much suffering, then we are morally restricted from doing that. So Bentham saw this as a pretty good way of doing this, of saying that future generations, they don't really have an obligation. We shouldn't treat them as people in the same way we do people who are alive today, but we still take them into account. We can't completely disregard their needs and desires for the sake of our own. We can't be entirely selfish, but we don't have to consider them the same way we do people who are alive today.
There's a lot of different theories about what exactly is going on with responsibilities of future generations. I don't know, here's a couple of them. Let you be the judge. Personally, I'm pretty skeptical about a lot of it. But yeah, it's up to you. That's the purpose of our show. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. This is Caleb.
And Bill.
And as ever, this is Philosophy Talks, and we'll have this listened to hopefully soon. We'll see.
Yeah, this should be up on YouTube by the time people are listening to this, and hopefully we will get the instant streaming back up and running by
The time
next
you're hearing
week.
this. Yep.
Yes, by the time that you are hearing this, yes.
All right. Cheers, guys. Take it easy.
Peace.